evaluated. Okay, so we move on today with Alex's paper. Well, I suggest you to move on directly. No other presentation needed.
Let's speak about the paper then. Is it too loud or maybe here? Okay, I'm just hearing the echo. All right, so I'm going to present a paper that is a bit of cursed. So it has been rejected so many times that it now is facing an identity crisis. Yeah, maybe like that. Yeah, I actually have a different version of this presentation, which is explaining the story of rejection to rejection. So if you'd like that, we can do it in the evening. Either way, so that's not the presentation. Sorry, just noticed. I have a lot of.
Yeah. For some reason, it doesn't work in full screen.
No, you need to put it, I think, in presentation mode first, and then
yeah.
share the screen.
Yeah, you're right.
Window, this one. All right, so it's I don't. Maybe we should. Which one? That's why I'm so loud. Okay, I thought. All right, sorry about that. Yeah, that's better. All right, so this is so due to this identity crisis, it's the narrative is still not fully established, and it might come across a bit sloppy. So feel free to be critical and intervene and help me out. We have been discussing this case for a while. It intuitively feels there is something important to it, but we haven't been able to pin it down. So any comments would be greatly appreciated. So this is a case about patents, as the title already implied. And so to also take a historical background to my own academic roots is so this book by my professor Eric Reinert on how rich countries got rich. So it is a book about development and especially uneven development, which is also why some countries stay poor. It does make this argument around patents as a general logic of artificial scarcity creation, which is in general coupled with another institution that we don't often talk about so much, which is tariffs. So patents and protection are basically the two sides of the same coin, but in the current stage of development, one of them is considered good and the other one is considered bad. So which one of the two institutions is mostly used by rich countries? I leave it up to you to decide. So this is the broader conversation, but by its definition, patents as an institutional arrangement is tightly interwoven with growth as an economic strategy. It is an industrial policy. It is its purpose is to create those productivity surges that upon which innovation and growth are dependent. So the question we try to ask is, does this actually work? Do patents spur innovation for society? And there are many different versions of this question per se. I'm going to present a specific narrative here. So to focus on whether patents spur innovation, there are a lot of different arguments in the literature of how patents are supposedly helping innovation. In general, there is no linear relation, so more patents doesn't mean more innovation and vice versa. But in general, the idea is that innovation needs strict IP to happen. This is more of a cultural dimension, if you want. There is no empirical evidence that is showing that increased innovation happens in patents unless you're measuring innovation by the number of patents, which is, what we know for sure is that patents work for patent holders. So they do help those who file the patents to create extra revenue through different strategies. So this is as far as the evidence can go. And they often work against the scientific base upon which they have been based. So research, basic research, but also applied research that is then artificially being kind of locked in a specific paradigm because of the economic incentives that the patents create around that. So in general, it has been argued that patents pose restraints to opportunities for collective invention. This is to maximize the number of inputs you can have in the experimentation process through which different positive spillovers occur and so on. And these are some of the people that said that. By the way, these are also including people from the rather mainstream innovation literature. So this is not the idea that patents are necessary for innovation and there cannot be innovation without IP that is strong and solid is more of a dragon's den argument rather than an innovation scholar. So this is kind of a caricature version that is often discussed. So the discussion around patents is much more nuanced actually, and there are critical approaches as well. What we would like to, we speaking for my co-authors, we're looking at cases of innovation that is actually happened without patents and specifically because patents have not gotten into the play. So, I mean, looking at things like the digital commons, things like from Wikipedia to free and open source software to WordPress, the Apache web server, the myriads of open source software, there are specifically forms of innovations that are based on not only the absence of strict IP, but they're using specific licenses that basically forbid knowledge appropriation so that the knowledge is reproduced from one community to the other. And from the domain of software, this has evolved into the physical realm with projects like in different domains from housing with the WikiHouse project that is producing here schematics and like IKEA how-to guides on building solid structures like small houses and so on, to nanosatellites, as this is a Greek project, the LibreSpace Foundation, to, of course, where I'm getting at is the RepRap. This is the first self-replicable 3D printer whose parts are like 90% 3D printable and the rest can be bought on low cost. So moving to the second part is that do patents spur innovation for society? What is innovation? What is the role of innovation in society? And this is where we come to find an interesting case of the 3D printer. So this is an open source 3D printer. There are different markets for proprietary 3D printers and open source and hybrids and so on. We're focusing on the open source model. So why 3D printers? 3D printing is a technology that has existed for a while. So the first patent was filed in 1989, and the technology exists since the 50s. However, the broader society, and this includes also the economy and industry, was not aware that such a thing existed and to experiment and work around the capabilities it produced. And the idea of producing physical structures out of digital structures seems quite, disruptive. So these are two graphs, one on from the Scopus database and one of Google Trends, just for a rough idea of what happens at this point, which is exactly when the patent for the FDM technology, this is the basic technology for additive manufacturing 3D printing, expired. So we have a sudden upsurge of interest in both scholarly disciplines and most importantly of the broader society of what this technology can do. And this can be also leveled and weighed with different terms that have been used in the scientific discipline, because there's also additive manufacturing, rapid replication, all sorts of things. We basically see the same upsurge with 3D printing taking over the whole discourse. So it is interesting the fact that nobody cared before the patent. So this is one of these cases. In 1992, Stratasys, the patent holder of the FDM technology, was developing machines that look like this. They were meant for industrial production. They had like a marginal use in some prototyping and in big design houses and so on. The open source 3D printers is kind of a spin-off of this technology that looks completely different. So it's more lightweight. It is do it yourself, and it created this experimentation around these new capabilities. And this is a picture of the RepRap project, which was the idea of creating, RepRap is short for Rapid Replicator. The idea was about a 3D printer that could reproduce the majority of its own parts with the rest put together and just like be self-replicating in some sense. And RepRap was an open source hardware project, which meant that the schematics and the technology behind how the thing was built were being documented and put on the internet online, so different variations could be created, including also commercial variations. So it wasn't only an academic or playful experimentation project. And the use of these machines, so the open source 3D printers, the commercial 3D printers, as they often discussed, flourished in spaces like that. Fab labs, maker spaces, hacker spaces, where people would come together, tinker with this new technology, among others, exchange ideas, build different prototypes with the idea of creating the next disruption and innovation that would change the world or whatever. So there was a lot of that happening, and this gradually evolved into a whole culture. So the maker culture, the do-it-yourself culture, that has different political significations, which we can discuss afterwards. But as in general, some of the common ideas underpinning all of the different variations had to do with open access to knowledge and technology, to transparency in the means of production and the things we rely upon. This idea of breaking the boundaries of the black box that was technology to that point, getting the people in there, developing the capabilities of understanding how things work, fixing things yourself, experimentation, and so on. So I don't remember what the next slide is. Yeah, a short history. So in 2012, one of the commercial variations that was the most successful at the time was the Replicator 3D printer by MakerBot. MakerBot was a small startup. It started tinkering with a RepRap model in a makerspace. They built the prototype, they commercialized it. It went very well. So they also created an online space where communities would share CAD files for, it was called the Thingiverse. The idea was to have a universe of things that people could just 3D print into their own homes. That was the value proposition of the time, and the idea of how 3D printers would basically change the way people consume stuff, because instead of buying them, they can just download the files and print them in homes or hacker spaces. So Thingiverse was a very successful platform. It had thousands of designs and a very vibrant community exchanging designs and ideas that was also working on the technology itself. So not only on stuff that could be 3D printed, but also the 3D printer. So that caught the attention of Stratasys, which until 2009 was the holder of the patent. And they said, that's a very good idea. Maybe we can also sell commercial 3D printers. So in 2013, they make a deal and buy out MakerBot. By 2015, they fire Prebetis, which was the MakerBot founder. And then first thing they do, they patent the technology. So they basically bought up an alternative version of their own technology, not with the intention to shut it down. That would be too much to say, but in order to bring it into their own business model, they ended up changing the whole way that the business was working. And this, of course, had an impact also in its in the MakerBot and Stratasys economics. So this is a graph. This is, of course, again, very superficial, not really looking and weighing down with the different things that was happening in the economy, but it's indicative that both in terms of revenue of Stratasys, 2014 is the peak. The first year they bought MakerBot and they started expanding into new markets. And this is also the peak of their share price. So the difference is just too big to ignore. That's the argument. There was also impact on the community of makers that started gathering around this technology. So by 2015 already, the company was facing problems in keeping up the production. So they started downsizing. They laid off 20% of their staff. 2016, basically were no longer making their own 3D printers, moved the manufacturing into China, and that was the end of it. The community was furious, most importantly, not only because of the culture that MakerBot had a kind of a brand that we are manufacturing in the USA. So when they moved to China, people were already enraged. And then when they filed patent on the new version of MakerBot, people just lost it. And most importantly, at some point, the new patent included a part of the extruder. This is the device that melts the plastic to do the 3D printing thing. That included, among others, contributions from the community, because the community was also experimenting with the technology itself, not only with what you could do with that, and the company was getting feedback from that. So appropriating the knowledge that was collectively created by the community and then shutting them down was, of course, something that they didn't like. Of course, afterwards, other 3D printers took over. This is, of course, this is the bar that says other, by the way. So there's a rapidly expanding universe of RepRap-based designs in 3D printers. The ones that are doing relatively better on is the Ultimaker and Prusa design. Formlabs is a proprietary 3D printer. It's a different type of technology, but the open source 3D printers of the other companies have already taken over MakerBot, which by the time was like the big name and then lost their market share. In the meantime, 3D printing technology started to get enclosed heavily as the new market was created, and with Stratasys, of course, being among the ones. And this also includes patents that are both on the technology, but also on users on the technology. So it's not indicative of what Stratasys is doing, but it does demonstrate a general direction. So, do patents spur innovation for society? Maybe we need to focus on innovation per se. So maybe the problem is neither the patents as an institution, nor the role of innovation in society, but the idea that we have in innovation, which is where Mario Pansera comes into place. So to leave patents out of the question for a bit, we can ask whether innovation works for society in general, and what would that mean? And here's where I will become a bit personal and dramatic, but as I have been mentioning again and again, yesterday it was a really dark anniversary in Greece. So this thing happened 28th of February 2023, 2 trains traveling on the same line for like 19 minutes, one of them carrying passengers, another one carrying cargo train, just realized they were going on the same line and collided. 57 people died. Nobody went to jail other than some minor employees that were arguably not doing their job correctly, but there were, of course, other things. What I'm getting with that is that in 2023, one would expect that train traveling would be relatively safe and that trains would not end up on the same line. What happened was that the manual controller of the station did a mistake, and instead of directing the train to one line, it directed it to the other, where the other train was coming downwards. But the problem is that there are, by European law, there are at least 4 safety measures, including automatic brake, light signaling, and telegovernance, remote control of the train line per se, that in Greece were not in place. And they were supposed to be in place. Big companies were paid money to install them. They stalled the contract again and again. And at some point, after this happened, we just realized that train traveling was basically not having accidents every day out of pure luck. So it was down to a factor of one person doing their job, having a very limited understanding and knowledge of where the trains are, because they only had like the local control panel. They started the whole discussion. How is this a thing? So what is the point of having more and more sophisticated technologies and creating growth and shareholder value out of that if this technology can not be diffused effectively to improve the lives of people, let alone technologies that were specifically designed and installed in a system but then left to degrade? Because some of the safety systems were part of the infrastructure but were just not maintained correctly, because there is much less innovation happening with maintenance and taking care of infrastructures and so on. So the elephant in the room is, of course, that when we're looking at innovation and technology, we imagine fancy stuff, new disruptive technologies that change the way we live and move around. But at the same time, technology is everywhere and is as tightly interwoven with society as society is with technology. And we cannot speak about a paradigm of innovation on whether something works or not if we ignore how the system reproduces itself, how it qualifies certain outcomes over others. So saying that commercial 3D printing didn't go well with the markets is an understatement, because this is not something that just happened naturally. This is an outcome that was created by the type of institutions that we have and the values that work with it. So what are these values? Let's try to break them a bit down. So the mantra of innovation is this idea of innovate or die, in which innovation is always positive, it is desirable, it is apolitical. So innovation is engineers doing their stuff. There is no politics, no normative ideas behind that. And technology is always good and neutral, which creates two fundamental assumptions about innovation. Innovation delivers growth and prosperity for all, that is productivism, and determinism, that innovation is inevitable and unstoppable. This is that quasi-natural force that we don't have agency to shape and control, and it is just going its own way. We might as well accept it. Which in the train accident that I showed, both of them can be refuted. So innovation definitely didn't deliver growth and prosperity for all there, and it appears that it was stoppable on the level of implementation, but not in the way that we often discuss about it. So what do we do with that? We take an STS approach. Innovation is political. Technology is constructed around and imbued with values and cultures in which it emerges. And in this latter part is where I would like to focus. So how can we understand the values and the cultures through which new technologies emerge, and how we can reproduce them in the way to serve the purpose they were supposed to serve in their emergence? So if we look at the one side, the elephant in the room values, the kind of default is that knowledge needs to be appropriated because it is so easily reproduced and everyone will be a free rider. Planned obsolescence is that, which also includes that things are designed not to last too long and designed not to be repaired easily because we need to keep on doing stuff. And eco-efficiency is the thing that ecological and sustainability is seen as only served through more efficient technologies, things doing more with less, which is a thing I'm not going to focus so much. In the case of 3D printer, we can observe the emergence of alternative value. So one, we have open access to knowledge, free diffusion and reproduction of knowledge. We have a strong culture around the adaptability of different technologies, the repairability and maintenance, the understanding of how they work and improving their design and so on. And the latter part that is not directly visible through the case per se is eco-sufficiency, which is the counterpart of eco-efficiency, meaning that having enough to cover social needs without pushing the planetary boundaries. So why is 3D printing important from a post-growth perspective? I'm not making the claim that post-growth, that 3D printing and maker culture is degrowth or post-growth per se, because it isn't. And a large section of how the culture emerged and developed is closer to the startup culture rather than anything else. But the 3D printer as a cluster of new technological capabilities and the ideas and skills and knowledge that it mobilized around it has been a paradigmatic shift that gave prominence to other initiatives as well. So focusing on knowledge management, because when I started this presentation like 2 hours ago, I was speaking about patents. So 3D printing technology emerged from diverse contributions. Of course, in the initial, the basic research was, of course, publicly funded, National Science Foundation money, probably defense agencies money in the US. Then there were some proprietary actors getting into place. Then there was the community, there was the interaction. So one cannot make a clear case of whether commercial 3D printing has been a community technology or it has been a proprietary technology. But what we can surely say is that there was this diverse contributions that created this specific configuration. The open source 3D printer market showcases an alternative innovation system. So it's not only that the technology was different, the audience was different, the customers were different, the users were different, and there was a support system that developed with the platforms, the CAD files, the digital fabrication, the maker spaces, everything like that, that basically showcased an alternative approach to innovation, an alternative innovation system. It is impossible to quantify, as I said, the contribution of patents. We cannot say what would happen if Stratasys would not have patented the technology to begin with, or whether the open source practices would be supported in a different way, but trying to do so is already in the wrong direction, we argue. What is interesting to say is that the role of patents has been at least ambivalent, and the leap in developing open source 3D printers, it's not so much of a technical endeavor, but most notably a political. So the reason why this technology flourished at this particular time in these particular spaces had to do with many other factors, of course, other than that the patent expired. That was 2009. And if you remember, 2007, 2008 was not a fun time to be around. People were looking in different ways to become politically engaged and mobilized, and doing things with their hands was a very favorable alternative as to whatever political parties had to offer at the time. So this is where the commons comes into place. Open source is premised on the idea of the commons, of shared resources maintained and stewarded by a community based on their own rules. And this is how, to a large extent, the technology has been developed. So the commons bring on a normative directionality into how knowledge can be managed in a post-growth direction. And this is one that speaks about better technology and not so much about more technology, faster technology, stronger technology for and with society. Openness has been, as I said, a condition fueling technological advance that challenges innovation scholarship, as it alone seems to be incompatible with a sustained market operation. So one of the first failures of this paper was that we tried to make an argument from an innovation policy perspective. And the responses we got was that Stratasys was a successful company. They filed the patent, they controlled the market for 20 years, they did fairly well, they're still alive and investing. So what is your point? But the whole idea is that there is a qualitative difference in the technological advance that was completely left alone. So open source 3D printing and the innovation system around it is a challenge to innovation scholarship because it was not able to be sustained as a market operation. And hence, markets as a selection mechanism were not apt to capture the value that was created from this form of technology. So we suggest that we can look on a common space innovation regime that may resolve these ambiguities, repurpose innovation for society, and create more possibilities. I had some other more sloppy arguments to make, but I think I can cut it short here. So this is where Matsukato comes into place, that they make some arguments around the commons. And yeah, to finish off, what do we learn from 3D printing? There are two stories that we can in which we can present the case. From the conventional mainstream innovation literature, open source 3D printing is a clear market failure. There was an innovation, it's advanced, it created a system, it wasn't able to generate enough revenue to grow and keep the operation. So openness is a paradox for profitability. So if you cannot appropriate the technology, how are you supposed to phase out competition and build the market structure that creates this Schumpeterian rent that allows innovation to flourish? Openness at the end has been discussed as there is now this paradigm of open innovation and so on, which basically gets boiled down to a watered down version of contingencies under which openness might make sense. So this is not a particularly open position. And there is also this idea of strategic openness, which might as well be strategic closeness, which is which parts to open and which not. Of course, this whole idea of diverse inputs in innovation is not entirely new. Innovation literature has been talking a lot about that. And then open source 3D printing eventually fails to meet either society's or market objectives. So what MakerBot tried to do was to secure the capitalization that Stratasys was providing while keeping contact with the community. And that was inherently incompatible. And they failed spectacularly in both. And then we have the relapse to the proprietary approach. So why is 3D printing interesting is because there is this argument that we can make that 3D printing is at the core of grassroots digital fabrication, which has been developed in places like Fab Labs and makerspaces and so on. And it has been argued for its potential to open up new possibilities, to democratize manufacturing and the production process per se, unlocking social innovation and entrepreneurship, direct business practices to a more socially desirable outcomes, and trigger more sustainable production and consumption. However, these contributions are rarely assessed in a systematic way. These are just hypotheses we can make out of the preliminary findings that we can observe into the cases, but there is no systematic way to assess that. And that is exactly the point, because the systematic way to assess that is through the market selection mechanism. And so we cannot make the case of this technology being significant. What we can make a case for is to see other paradigms that emerge. And I'm going to quickly show a couple of examples. So this is Open Bionics, is an initiative that builds low-cost prosthetic and robotic devices. These are prosthetic hands that can be produced with local materials using a 3D printer at a fraction of the cost of a sophisticated mechanical hand. What is interesting is that they also put the schematics online, everything from the mechanical parts to the few electronic parts that they use. The interesting thing is that how the idea of making this hand as low cost as possible and 3D printable changed the design process in order to use as less electronic materials as possible to make the hand durable, to make it repairable and maintainable from the user with the help of some local expert in the makerspace. And there are other examples around that on wind turbines, agricultural production from our field work. So these cases present a different story. Open source 3D printing as a potentially post-growth aligned form of innovation. Openness enables innovation and entrepreneurship for the common good. So there is a different directionality of the possibilities and the selection mechanism through which technology advances. Open knowledge regimes can help democratize manufacturing. There's broader diffusion of technology and learning, and they're triggering more sustainable production and consumption patterns. So even the idea that was honestly absurd, that instead of buying stuff, you can 3D print it from home, is already one step more sustainable than manufacturing everything in one side of the world, shipping it down to the other side, only to be thrown back as garbage to the other side again. So I'm not suggesting that the system as it is, we just replace everything with 3D printers or bikes, makes a degrowth technological statement, but it is triggering the discussion of understanding how consumption and production could be organized differently. And of course, this is centering around empowering communities in participating in the production process. So how we could organize production and consumption, our suggestion is the thing we call cosmology, that it builds on open knowledge, design, and software shared globally as digital commons, and different initiatives like Open Bionics or the other things that I didn't have the time to present, manufacturing locally to cover social needs with social and environmental conditions in mind. So whether 3D printing alone is directly hinting to these developments, it is not. But as a technology and as a way of technological advance, it does trigger the kind of discourse in which we can develop this form of arrangement. So what are the critical questions for post-growth? And with this, I finish, I promise. There is a technological starting point. So there was a lot of things happening in 2009, but there were these specific technological capabilities of creating things out of thin air that mobilized a whole culture and a new set of underutilized human creativity, skills, knowledge, and so on. But from there on, there needs to be political development. What is this political development and how does it look like? One of the explanations we can give on the failure of MakerBot is that the organizational values were not compatible with the broader system. And one way to address that, this is the Matsukato part, which I omitted, by the way, is through the understanding of public value. So reorienting innovation and the way it contributes to the common good through new organizational values, so that organizations that are not looking into maximizing growth could also survive into the market. And finally, an open question, because we mentioned decolonization before, is that in degrowth especially, there is this dominant discourse around decolonizing knowledge, which is of course important, but what we also need not forget is that decolonization also means other things. And if we decolonize knowledge and we understand different perspectives and we open up our worldviews and ontologies and so on, it still doesn't fix the stuff that we have done in the past. So post-growth, in my opinion, must engage with a way to also remedy the situations of colonialism, among other things. And this form of technological development might give an alternative perspective so that we can, we have built a lot of stuff out of blood and exploitation, but maybe other people can do things with this stuff that will take them to a different direction. So how about opening up whatever we have produced out there? Just a radical proposition. Thank you.
Okay, I think this was very enriching. We open up to the discussion. Maybe I can start. Yeah, can I start? Yeah, you have a question. Well, I launch a provocation that you're already aware of my provocation to the cosmolocalism, which is the fact that all this idea of digital commons is based on an infrastructure, which is in the internet. So, which is also like a colonial structure, if you want, because just you end the conversation with the decolonizing innovation. In the internet network was designed to be a common managed by the military, right? Something in the image industry and scientists. And then all the design of the web, the HTTP protocol was an idea of sharing knowledge. A lot of technical and political and social aspects remains to be analyzed in terms of how we, how we make internet common again, considering the fact that the physical infrastructure of the internet is now more and more co-opted and owned by private sectors. No, yeah, Facebook and Google, even Amazon and even Netflix now installing internet submarine cables. So I think that's framing innovation, post-growth innovation in terms of commons requires also understanding how we can frame the infrastructure that then enable this innovation to flourish as a common. Otherwise, we have cars, but we don't have highways. And okay, so this is my first point, and we have yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a shorter way of putting it is the trouble is that there isn't a commons there. I mean, you're saying, yeah, the infrastructure that supports it needs to be made to a commons, but even around 3D printing, maybe there's a difference between open access and commons as Ostrom and you know, and all the new kind of forms of commoning, which is all about agreeing forms of self-governance and rules of what you can and can't do with it. So what Straticists were able to do, you know, there wasn't a strong enough commons there, might be the counterfactual argument, to prevent that kind of encroachment and capture of this commons. So there's a lot in your presentation. I thought by starting with patents, and there's one argument there about wanting to prove, you know, elaborate, use this example to kind of question the social benefits of patenting or disentangle or criticize that. That's one thing, but you're already then in that a point of departure that's related to open innovation and exploiting people's inputs and encroaching. Whereas if you just sort of forget that and just focus on the kind of commoning aspects and just thinking about what we can learn from that case as a you know, a struggle to create commons that sort of is incomplete, or you know, where it kind of succeeded and went wrong. That's kind of one thought. And then the other thing about that though is, I don't know if you ever read, is it Elizabeth Eisenstein wrote this really nice book about the printing press as an agent of social change, and how the invention of the you know, the printing press sort of. And one of the interesting things about that was that I remember, it's been a long time since I read it, was how the printing shops back then in like the 16th century, people would come from different kind of social worlds to get stuff printed or to find out about it. And so its agency was as much about the encounters that it enabled and the way that facilitated new kind of paradigms of thinking and enabled people to present things in new ways, like tables and stuff. That's where the agency came from. And I wonder if, almost like, not saying history repeats itself, but maybe thinking about that historical study in relation to 3D printing and the kind of cultural aspects as well as the technical aspects of this kind of commoning would be interesting or worth pursuing. But yeah, just two comments really.
Okay. Is this related or okay? So maybe just follow up on the questions and then
I'll try to keep it short because there's a lot of things unpacked here, and it's to start from the latter point. I think if we ignore everything else, that is definitely one of the ways that the maker culture enabled diverse possibility. So if we look at it as a process of diversity creation, it was very successful in bringing people together that would otherwise not come in the same place and try to understand how things work. This discussion we had earlier of, you know, not enough joint cafeterias in campuses. You also you're working on a case in Barcelona with the smart infrastructure, in which eventually the infrastructure itself, the technology was not, well, not the technology, the tools, the artifacts was not the important part after all, was the fact that people came together. And I think that's a very important aspect also from an STS perspective. And to lead back to the infrastructure, yeah, of course, this is why I felt this is the identity crisis everything creates in, you know, being a white boy, is that, you know, everything I can enjoy and do my critical work has been part of this system. I mean, you cannot differentiate that. And even to its most extremes, the worst histories we remember of, you know, some quite unpleasant people in Europe that had some strong views about other people, well, they're not really the exception. And a lot of the things upon which we rely upon today, from chemical fertilizers in agriculture to accounting systems, have been developed during that time. And, you know, global trade, some of the global logistics were developed by, you know, the way human trafficking was taking place and people were being kept track of and so on. So yes, there is this aspect of the blood-based infrastructure. which of course is not an argument to tear down everything that was built upon exploitation, because then we will have nothing. And that's not a constructive argument. But what we can do is acknowledge that we may have done some bad things and try to understand reparations in a broader sense. What are the different ways that we can, not to exonerate the West dominance from its bloody history, but to create a situation where new possibilities might emerge, and many of them might have answers to the things that are really great challenges of the time.
Now, see, yeah. Okay, so of course, I particularly like the slide when you pulled out the STS stuff and said like, okay, and this is not like technology is not determinist and it's not just leading automatically to social progress and so on. And we need to decouple all of this and so on and so on. And then in the end of your presentation, you tell us all your beautiful story. You come back and you tell me, and there have been these amazing technological new capabilities of 3D printing, and then everything got politicized. And this is exactly the move that we in STS would reject as, okay, there has been something like neutral technology developments. Suddenly we have this new amazing capacities or this new form of knowledge, which is in and of itself completely apolitical, neutral, and so on, has just emerged because we have the engineering capacities, the new materials, the whatever new combinations of knowledge and so on. And then politics kicks in and everything gets co-opted, and then all the politics starts, right? So, which is where I really wondered where in your story, so you told us so much about the commons, you told us so much about open source, about patents and so on, and how they shaped this particular technology, and then the structures, the social and community structures that emerged around them, from being very community oriented to very corporate. But you somehow don't acknowledge that. But in the end, you fall back to just tell us a linear story about technological development that leads to social development that then has to be judged in terms of whether it's political or not. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I was like, yes. And in the end, I was like, no. And now he's doing the same linear storytelling that actually the slide that you pulled up on STS tries to delete from our kind of thinking, because the technology that we had, these amazing technological capacities in the first place, was already the result of similar social and political processes that
I feel bad that I disappointed you, because this is down to the sloppiness of the narrative and the sloppiness of me putting this presentation yesterday at 2 o'clock. So because that was not the argument I was trying to make, and I fully agree with your position. So I was going away from the linear story and saying that we take technological capabilities as a starting point, acknowledging that how these capabilities are being selected and developed is a political process. And then the political development here, I used the term political in 2 different ways. That's why I was making a normative judgment that, there are different possibilities. I pointed out to one, but which one of those we should select is a normative and political argument. So we need to engage with the political values behind the technological development, acknowledge the different directions it can take, and actually enable agency for the type of configuration to emerge that can have better societal outcomes, however this is defined. And this is what I was getting into with the public value. So I don't know if that exonerates me, because I definitely did not believe that the capabilities emerged out of engineering ingenuity alone. I was exactly making the argument that this was not a technological process on its own. It was a constellation of different factors of the time. Yeah, definitely. Okay.
Thank you, Alex. One of my questions has already been dealt with. I was going to say, like, I was struck by the sort of ambivalence that you showed. Like sometimes you
kind of show some caution, very cautious, like we need to see whether to test these questions more empirically, and I agree with that. But then there was a very strong like technotopian narrative in your story, but I think you have already asked that. The other thing I wanted to ask you is like also relates to what Adrian was saying. If I understood your question correctly, when you mentioned like the printer, the printer, in your narrative, I see like there is a strong, like very strong social constructionist like ontology behind it, like as if this technology will be whatever society wants it to be. Is there any technical agency there that is being like overlooked, that might set like specific pathways, make certain things possible, but also like others impossible, regardless of what society, whatever society is, that we could talk about this later. But so my question is, what is the role of like, technical agency as opposed to society, which I understand society as in the traditional sense.
Yeah, exactly.
And the other question I had, it strikes me, I mean, we have done some research on the right to repair, and one of the big frames in the right to repair comes from the maker movement. We call it the grassroots innovation, which is this idea that the right to repair and tinker with products is legitimized on the basis that people have the right to experiment and play with technology and innovate with it, etc. But then, like, what we found is that there are different framings of the right to repair. For example, the environmental frame and this open innovation or grassroots innovation framing, which might be incompatible with each other. So is it possible?
Is it compatible or
incompatible?
Yeah.
So is it possible that a more democratic technology, like where people can 3D print whatever they want, could be incompatible with a strong environmental agenda, for example, or the other way around? Is it possible, like a strong environmental agenda, such as the one that we, like in the post-growth or degrowth community, we advocate for, might be incompatible with the fact that we need to democratize 3D printers? At some point, you mentioned that maybe we need to put a question mark on this. But again, I wasn't clear about what your position is on that, because
I wasn't clear myself. That's why I appreciate the discussion.
So my question is more about the possibility of contradictions and trade-offs that to be made between openness, environmental agenda, democratizing something versus not.
I have microphone.
I got carried.
You want to follow up on that? Okay, because this is a very intriguing argument, and I fully agree with you. And this is one of the reasons that it hasn't been really well articulated, that this is where the commons can offer a more structured and institutional way of going about. As Adrian mentioned before, another story you can make about 3D printing is the one about the tragedy of the commons, right? Which could be, someone would make that. But then again, it is exactly that we didn't have a strong enough commons that led to the failure. It wasn't because this is how commons work. And I would say that when we're speaking about democratization of technology, it also includes the idea that we have about democracy, because democracy is also not a free-for-all. It's not an open situation when all opinions have equal weight. Some of them work and some of them are underrepresented, but this doesn't speak about their value. Right? And the whole point of having a structure like a state or whatever else it might be is to exactly protect the ones that are most vulnerable. So I fully agree that the technological aspects on their own and the idea of openness per se, they alone cannot determine a more ecologically sustainable outcome. And I fully agree that there needs to be planning into the process. This is why I use the word triggered production and consumption patterns that could be more sustainable, but they need a structured institutional environment for them to work. And this is where our proposition is cosmolocalism, but this is just a rough idea that is based on thin empirical evidence and pilot research. So there's no specific way to address the whole political economy. The infrastructures are a great part, social reproduction is another. There are a lot of blind spots around. And to go back to the first question, this is why I would consider, I'm not very savvy with STS, but this is why I often consider my underpinnings to be closer with critical theory of technology rather than social construction, because when you say technology can be anything that society chooses, and whether technology has agency, technology and society are embedded. So you cannot differentiate one from the other. And technology definitely has agency, which is cumulative, historical, institutional aspects that are conditioning specific outcomes, but not necessarily determining them. So you cannot fully ignore that things were built to do a specific thing, but a gun is built to kill. You can use it as a stopper for the door not to shut from the air, but this is not maybe a good idea. You can still do that, but the design has agency upon what it does. So the technological perspective that we use in our research is that technology is political. So we have abandoned the technology's ambivalent narrative and shifted to political, because the way things are designed, produced, and reproduced within society, even disposed after their end of life, qualify certain outcomes over others. And there is agency in shaping and reshaping this trajectory, but you need to critically engage with its roots and the evolution of the how the things and the knowledge around the artifacts is being developed. Yeah.
How is designed the mic?
No, but I agree with you, and I think my comment was more like in terms of steering the debate in that direction, because I think I thought that that's exactly what your view is. I'm not sure whether the vocabulary that you use is making very clear the separation between technology and this impossibility of separating technology and society. Sometimes it feels the other way, like this. That's why I made the comment. I don't believe that this is the case.
No, definitely. And the case does
like
create this dichotomy. It's the community versus the corporations and
exactly,
this kind of stuff.
Exactly. So it was more about the way you were telling the story rather than what. So it was more about.
No, definitely. Thanks for that.
Yes, thank you so much for the presentation. I have a question concerning. I have a question.
Yeah, that's my notification to get a peel. So don't worry about that. I won't die. Go on.
Okay. I had a question concerning the first part of the presentation when you speak about patents. Well, not. I would like to focus on patents. So I would like to know, in terms of property or license, how do you relate what you presented to specific legal forms that could allow the kind of technology and uses of technology that you present us? Do you have a specific, I don't know, preferences regarding some types of licenses, or maybe you can do a quick summary, because I think it's a really interesting topic.
It's not very relevant to this case, because it's they didn't really think that through. I mean, which is part of the problem. Why? So, for instance, there's this huge discussion on open hardware, on whether open hardware is basically based on Creative Commons licenses of the designs, but there's a different thing. There's a difference between intellectual property and industrial property, and open hardware plays somewhere in between. And there's a huge debate on whether this is enough, because, for instance, Creative Commons licenses are retractable, and can you retract the licensing of a hardware product that has been based upon other hardware products, and where do you draw the line and everything like that? So the discussion in which convinces me the most, because this is not my domain, is that open hardware, or the open hardware as a thing needs a positive licensing legal and institutional framework, because what we'll be doing right now, following the copyleft idea from software is basically reverse engineering intellectual property legislation, which is I think it has reached its limit. So this is a huge discussion, and this is also partially why what Adrian already mentioned, that we didn't have a strong enough commons because there weren't institutions in place so that the communities could actually manage the resources and relationships upon which these resources were managed. So the head agency openness enabled this experimentation, but it didn't protect, let's say, the outcomes and the relationships built around. Yeah, MakerBot. And also the proprietary version of the printer was also not fully proprietary because it was using some part from the first version. So they closed down some aspects and then opened up some others. There are hybrid models, but this, for me, this also verifies the point that we need better institutional framework for commons-based hardware technology.
Yes, because for example, in the case you said, if I understood well, you had the possibility of commodifying really fast what people have created collectively, no? Suddenly you work collectively like for 20 years and someone buys it, and then in 2 years it has completely changed the logic of the thing. So that's why I wanted to ask this question, no? Because as well as these existing dominant patent systems work, they maintain the power, the privilege, and they limit innovation, as you say. But yeah, it might be interesting to explore like how other legal institutions, as you say, could do the opposite, no? And or invent what property means that is non-property, we can say, no?
Yeah, and the maker movement itself is not at all a pure form of community organizing. To a certain extent, I think it also co-opted many of the ideas and language of grassroots organizations by referring to a community that wasn't really a community, just a bunch of enthusiasts that were sharing stuff online is an important element compared to industrial production, but not compared to grassroots community spaces of co-creation and sharing and so on. And also the commercialization element was very strong, which is evinced from the fact that Craig Bettis, the founder of MakerBot, created this, was playing around with the RepRap prototype specifically to create a product and make a lot of money out of the market. There was no question about it.
I will just like make one point and maybe we can discuss about it later. Like a lot of things what you said is like, for me, it's just about like open innovation, like which is a mainstream idea in innovation studies. Like Chesberg has been writing about it from 2002 onwards. So I don't see it in any other lens. For me, it's a standard case of open innovation, like where companies are putting their certain kind of technologies and innovation in the outside, again with the logic of like, I don't know, not for like no growth or no profit, but in the search of more profit and more growth. Sometimes they acquire, sometimes like they buy something from the like grassroots or like whatever is going outside. So for me, the whole story is happening in this particular political economic context, like what you started with, patent and trade, and then when you ended, you like, I don't know, like, so the story is like, for me, still a mainstream story. I don't know how to operationalize it in a post-growth context, because there is so much hybridity and like the relationality is very strong. So I think like that part, like rather than talking about patent and some of the other stuff, which is very well known in the STS literature and many other innovation studies literature, but the commoning thing can be, I think, like more important, like how the commoning can happen or may happen, or whatever the what are the pathways which you imagine are going to be important.
I think that's probably the psychological resolution of this identity crisis, is to focus on the fact that actually tell a different story. And then, because the original version was to make a case about open innovation, with the whole point being that open innovation doesn't really offer anything, because it just reframes stuff that was there in innovation literature, just using the language of community organizing, and then offering nothing back into actual community organizing. So yeah, maybe the commons element needs to be more prominent, not just in the discussion, but as a core of the framework. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that.
All right, thank you so much. I think like we can close. Thank you. And now we can invite Tess for the final presentation, and Nina. Yeah. So the floor is yours.
Presenter mode was not working. So I fixed that by making two computers. It's slightly complicated, but it's path dependent. I don't know. Does it No, no, we just opened the presentation. How? Help. You have two Mac users trying desperately to make the computer work.
Okay, where is the?
It's a PDF
presentation?
on the desktop.
It's already
This
open.
one.
PDF. No,
This is
no,
PDF.
presentation PDF.
Oh.
That one.
Okay. Now they see it.
No.
Uh-huh.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Mario. Okay. No, hopefully we can coordinate ourselves.
Yeah. Here, no? Now it's really blurry.
Now it's
But-
weird. Shrink it. Better. Okay. Okay. So. Yeah, great. So first off, I have to begin with an apology to the organizers and my other participants because we have not uploaded paper. I know, but with a little bit of explanation and excuse making and just to sort of frame what we're up to here. In that we were ready, it was going to be late, but we were going to upload a paper. But upon Nina's arrival, we got into a discussion where we started deconstructing our own argument in what we had already written in the paper and asking about the limitations of the sort of the imaginary that we were wanting to discuss, which was related to the relationship between innovation and growth, right? And so we were working with this sort of this imaginal space and asking what the sort of durability and the like relationality in this imaginary were, and thinking together, and also discussing how our work could speak, how our sort of work from our situated place within the broader field of SDS could speak to this degrowth literature that we were sort of also giving ourselves a co-crash course on at the same time. And so in that process, we realized that there was a limitation to the framework that to the sort of analytical sort of framing that we had given the paper already, which was then very generative for coming up with quite a different argument in the end. So that made the whole paper that we'd already written sort of very much in construction, to say the least. And our new argument is manifest in these slides in this presentation. So also over the course of that time, I've been getting horribly sick. And so since Monday, I've gone downhill and I'm actually feeling rather terrible. But I will try to harness as much vivacity as I can and get through this. So we Homo sapiens are doing something we've never done before, lifting the lids on two giant Pandora's boxes at the same time without any idea of what could come flying out. These boxes, argues New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman, are artificial intelligence and climate change. News headlines appear to validate Friedman's hypothesis, as not a day goes by without some AI-related news or commentary. In a parallel but seemingly unrelated space of public discourse, news of record temperatures across the globe and in the oceans, storms, floods, fires, and imminent tipping points are equally prominent. To the casual reader, AI and environmental breakdown might seem like equally alarming but wholly distinct and unrelated phenomena. But Friedman frames these Pandora's boxes as fundamentally linked and realizing good futures in both domains as an issue of getting ethics and governance right. As the antidote to dystopian AI and environmental futures, and as the justification for his arguments for fine-tuning ethics and governance, Friedman brings AI to the rescue of the environment, arguing, if AI gives us a way to cushion the worst effects of climate change, if AI, in effect, gives us a do-over, we had better do it over right. That means with smart regulations to rapidly scale clean energy and with scaled sustainable values. His arguments elevate the governance of these interconnected domains as an existential imperative, the primary mechanism for pursuing and protecting the public good. It frames prospective action around filling that void and imbues AI innovation with all the urgency of avoiding impending catastrophic environmental futures. The European Commission follows a similar logic in its articulation of the role of what it calls the twin transitions in a new model of European economic growth. In its 2022 report, it explains, there's a broad consensus on the priorities for the European economic growth model. This includes the green and digital transitions, the need to enhance the Union's economic and social resilience, as well as our preparedness to shocks. The transformation of our economy is necessary to safeguard the prosperity and well-being of the citizens of the Union, especially in the current context of geopolitical instability and rising global challenges. This text illustrates key interlinking elements of the Commission's vision of change and how to achieve it. It is a strategy for pursuing public good, the well-being of the citizens of the Union, making digital technologies and environmental remediation central to economic transformations for a new European growth model. AI research and development is similarly characterized in the tech industry and civil society by a, quote, large consensus on steering AI development towards the good of the people and the environment. The vision of public good, as delivered through the pairing of AI and environment, is challenged by those who point out that the material mechanisms through which the transcendent promise of artificial intelligence is created are themselves incredibly resource intensive. The integration of digital technologies and AI further implicates the steep expansion of data and computing power, which translates into seemingly ever-increasing extraction of materials, water, and energy. The powerful stories of autonomous robots that AI visionaries spin out for public admiration, such as self-driving cars and service robots, potentially further extrapolate and multiply the levels of consumption and waste that are currently framed as distinctly human problems to an extra-human population, projecting AI into the future as a potentially limitless site of resource consumption. In this sense, the consonance between artificial intelligence and environmental action is anything but clear, as it appears poised to contribute to an ever-increasing scale to the very environmental problems that its promoters claim is essential to overcome. How, then, are AI and the environment so firmly situated in the policy and tech discourses as mutually interdependent in their imagined capacity to do nothing short of save the world? Degrowth scholarship has criticized imperatives of technological innovation and the ways it is framed as technoscientific progress as inextricably linked to economic growth. Since the mid-20th century, technological innovation has been framed through the vocabulary of neoclassical economics as essentially the commercialization of inventions and the placement of new products on the market. The idea that technological innovation is a key contributor, if not synonymous to economic growth, has been advanced in particular by organizations such as the OECD, which have not only suggested a number of indicators for measuring and benchmarking innovation performance across countries, but which have also pushed the innovation imperative as a part of the hegemony of growth within and beyond Western capitalist societies. In this frame, innovation was located between the objective truth-seeking, independent republic of science, on the one hand, and the rational, self-regulating, invisible hand of the market on the other, leaving little to no role for the state and the people themselves in the governance of innovation, which was imagined to naturally emerge from the technology market dyad. Degrowth scholarship has criticized this construction of innovation for being underwritten by an ideological commitment to optimistic expectations about technological progress and cornucopianism, and penetrated by a so-called growth fetishism. Such growth fetishism has arguably also overtaken attempts at greater acknowledgement of the limits of growth and the finite natural resources developed since the late 20th century. Following the critiques in degrowth scholarship, eco-modernist agendas such as sustainable development, green growth, and the green circular or bioeconomies only seem to suggest a post-growth position, but are, in this narrative, in fact, attempts at reform that follow the mantra that technology could decouple economic growth from its environmental impact, allowing economies to be simultaneously modernized while being brought into greater harmony with the environment. As Jason Hickel summarized, green growth scenarios play loose with science, assume incredibly unjust arrangements, and gamble with the future of humanity and all of life on Earth, simply to maintain ever-increasing levels of aggregate output in high-income countries. No matter the eco-friendliness invoked by the technologies advanced through eco-modernist projects, they are still inscribed within a paradigm of growth. This degrowth critique of innovation is hence primarily directed towards the alignment of innovation with growth imperatives, rather than with imperatives of innovation per se. Degrowth scholarship has argued that there exists a lack of empirical evidence regarding the contribution of innovation to economic growth, as well as of economic growth to social and environmental well-being. It questions the tools involved in knowledge production, interrogating links such as GDP measures and indicators, and sought alternative approaches and practices to detach the institutionally naturalized bonds established between innovation, economic growth, and desirable forms of life. This has included the development of frameworks such as frugal, grassroots, or convivial technology, as well as straightforward acknowledgement, such as that by Jason Hickel in this editorial that Mario referenced this morning, that yes, we need innovation to solve the ecological crisis. The critique of innovation growth nexus thus primarily leads to proposals of alternative visions of innovation stripped from the imperative of growth. It is by detaching innovation from the hegemony of growth that it is re-envisioned as a key pathway to desirable futures within degrowth literatures. In this way, the critique adopts a linear view on technological innovation as neutral and instrumental force that can be implied for the achievement of social and environmental well-being, and locates the politics of technology primarily in capitalist frames of technoscientific innovation. So, thinking across these distinct modes of critique of the innovation imperative, we suggest to take up the lens of socio-technical imaginaries to interrogate how innovation is constructed in contemporary environmental governance strategies that explicitly aim to transform economies and support new growth strategies. To see these dynamics in action, we focus on sites at which AI innovation and environmental governance are situated as mutually supporting projects. Sheila Jasanoff theorized socio-technical imaginaries as collectively held, institutionally stabilized, and publicly performed visions of desirable futures. animated by a shared understanding of forms of social life and social order, attainable through and supportive of advances in science and technology. Looking through this lens, we take innovation not simply as a floating signifier that can be given any definition, nor as a delimited set of actions which can be definitively categorized as such, based on a set of realist criteria. Instead, we take innovation as an actors category, examining the ways that it is made meaningful in context and mobilized by different actors to claim power and order the world. In these processes, we are attentive to the ways in which articulations of how the world is are co-produced with notions of how the world should be. It requires the analyst to examine innovation as situated within a set of powerful governing imaginaries, producing routinized and institutionally embedded normative and ontological settlements with powerful world-making force. So in this presentation, we take up such a lens and consider how contemporary governance rationalities situate technological innovation in relation to the public good, and the forms of governance that are imagined to be adequate and necessary for achieving the good futures that AI visionaries promise. In so doing, we argue that current policy discourses on the digital and environmental transition reveal shifting imperatives of governance that grant society and the state, not merely markets and growth, a key role in the achievement of desirable futures in relation to innovation. Since at least 2017, amid a growing private investment in AI research and development, governments across the world have been producing AI strategies, initiatives, and policies, the aim of which is to catalyze the transition from research and development to commercialization and degrowth into a range of economic sectors such as healthcare, agriculture, and defense. In these visions of good futures, AI is situated as capable of bringing outsized public benefits within the right ethical and governing configurations. This framing sets out a space for lawmakers to pursue their remit of protecting and providing for the well-being of their populations by securing AI for the public good. Accordingly, governments are committed to funding AI, which is typically designed as a public-private partnerships and presented as powerful tools for securing economic growth, market competitiveness, and social well-being. The U.S. National Science Foundation, for its part, recently committed to a $140 million investment for the creation of 7 new national AI research institutes, hoping not only to accelerate discovery and innovation in AI, but also to improve our lives from medicine to entertainment to transportation and cybersecurity, and position the U.S. in the vanguard of competitiveness and prosperity. Policymakers respond to the sense of rapidly changing AI innovation and the associated threats to carve out spaces of governance and forms of governing authority in relation to those risks, underwritten by a particular imaginary of the public good as achievable through innovation, properly governed. For instance, in April, members of the European Parliament called their colleagues to action with a declaration that recent advances in the field of artificial intelligence have demonstrated that the speed of technological progress is faster and more unpredictable than policymakers around the world have anticipated. With such rapid evolution of powerful AI, they see the need for significant political attention. Across these spaces of new economy making, AI is positioned as a linchpin technology promising the realization of good futures at light speed. As a recent Forbes headline gushes, robots and AI are saving the American economy with a boom in productivity, likening AI to magic beanstalk beans that allow higher wages without inflation. Yet policymakers emphasize the need to govern AI innovation to steer it in the right direction. According to US Senator Markey, in presenting the new AI Environmental Impacts Act, there is a Dickensian quality to the use of AI when it comes to our environment. It can make our planet better, and it can make our planet worse, which is why we need clear standards and voluntary reporting guidelines to measure AI's impact on our environment. He underlines this relationship by declaring the development of the next generation of AI tools cannot come at the expense of the health of our planet. Going back a decade before much of this outpouring of interest and support for AI, governing institutions have lined up under the banner of the circular economy, the bioeconomy, and sometimes the circular bioeconomy, already emphasizing the role of the state as a facilitator of environmental transformation by way of technological innovation and the production of new economies. In these documents, innovation is figured as at risk and in need of urgent action to realize its potential. The circular bioeconomy could produce human and environmental flourishing, the narrative goes, but only if societies take the right governance measures. The most recent European Action Plan for Circular Economy, in turn, envisions the circular economy to be powered by digital technologies such as the Internet of Things, big data, blockchain, and artificial intelligence, which will not only accelerate circularity, but also the dematerialization of our economy and make Europe less dependent on primary materials. But it also requires co-creation with the economic sectors, consumers, citizens, and civil society organizations to ensure that the regulatory framework is streamlined and made fit for a sustainable future, and that the new opportunities from the transition are maximized while minimizing burdens on people and businesses. This is the point at which we change. We change chairs.
Just that it's half-half. It makes no sense at this point, but well, it's not new part. So the story continues that with the introduction of its Green New Deal, you have to actually scroll. Yes. The European Union recently began pointing to the role of the so-called twin transition in environmental governance discourse. In so doing, the Commission emphasizes social equity, arguing, quote, "We must ensure the fairness of our economic model and protect those that are most affected by the transition, including those who lack the means or the skills to fully benefit from it. The transformation of the European economy will only succeed if it is fair and inclusive, and if everybody can gain from the opportunities the twin transition brings." Far from leaving the invisible hand to order the world, the Commission takes on the task of governing through and with innovation to advance its vision of public good, basing proposed actions in the need to render economic relations fair, inclusive, and environmentally beneficial. The strategy for achieving this transition is dual, according to the Commission. It demands investment and reforms to make, quote, "economic structures and the regulatory framework support economic transformation and be conducive to investment. Regarding regulatory reforms, they should remove, quote, "specific investment barriers, improve product and labor market functioning, modify production and consumption patterns, and strengthen socioeconomic resilience." Regulation is figured as having the capacity to clarify and harmonize rules across jurisdictions, not only within the EU, but in prospective international accords. As European parliamentarians make clear with regard to the currently negotiated AI Act, quote, "We are aware this regulation covering the entire EU market could serve as a blueprint for other regulatory initiatives in different regulatory traditions and environments around the world." So the ways through which AI and the environment are made productive for each other in these cases that we just discussed illustrate how policymaking on technoscientific innovation today stretches far beyond the gospel of growth and related eco-modernist narratives. Instead, contemporary discourses on technological innovation and its relationship to environmental change rely on and mobilize powerful visions of governance, democracy, and social inclusion as a prerequisite for the achievement of desirable futures. Rather than the mere generation of innovation for the sake of growth, innovation today has to be equally productive of good environmental futures and corollary forms of social well-being achievable through the right modes of governance. While imperatives to innovate in the late 20th century followed a simple linear formula that innovation enhances economic growth and thus also social well-being, we are arguably witnessing a paradigm shift in the ways we imagine technoscientific innovation contribution to the public good. And now I quote from Sebastian Fotenhauer, a colleague of ours: "Instead of simply asking for ever more innovation, many innovation actors seem to be asking for better innovation, embracing a more nuanced understanding of the relationship between innovation and the public good than mere economic benefits, including, amongst others, aspirations to better account for how the benefits and burdens are being distributed, which direction innovation takes, and what kind of future is enabled or prevented through innovation." Such shift also involves a departure from the centrality of the market's invisible hand in the production of innovation to a Keynesian rethinking of the role of politics and the states in the pursuit and governance of innovation, as reflected, for instance, and you have touched upon Mazzucato's work, within recent calls for the entrepreneurial state and the mission-oriented economy, and an emphasis on responsibility, ethics, and human rights in innovation governance. It implies changes in both who should ultimately adjudicate the desirability of innovation, from science and the market to societies and the state, as well as how we should decide on innovation pathways, from market self-regulation to democratic governance and collective deliberation. So, as Tess and I have argued earlier, taking these changes in imperatives on innovation and its role in the achievement of the public good seriously requires symmetrical analysis and corollary forms of critique that reject, and I quote from a paper of ours, not only highly idealized causal narratives of technoscientific progress and change, but in the same move, realist accounts of democratic politics and practice that guide policymaking on science and technology today. For the critique advanced in degrowth scholarship, this implies greater attention to how technoscientific innovation is linked to visions of the public good beyond master narratives of economic growth and eco-modernist reform, and how public institutions assume authority in the governance of innovation, including through the construction of new logics of social fixes, not so much technological fixes, to the problems and harms caused by technoscientific innovation in the future, particularly when it comes to the environment. Recalibrating analysis to these new governance discourses that both interface with, but also override techno-determinist imperatives of innovation for growth could provide new avenues for critique and an expanded field of spaces, subjects, and avenues of intervention. Such critique could go beyond delinking innovation from the growth agenda to counter the equally powerful link between innovation and visions of democracy and good governance established in policymaking today, and how both might be ripe for collective reimagination. Thank you.
I have a very quick comment on, I think the first domain that we can achieve maybe universal consensus on degrowth is public policy documents. So if we stop creating new and more policy documents, let's see what happens. What's the worst thing? And the second one is especially, I think I found it striking how much the quotes that you used from the policy documents seem as if they have been written by AI. So it's which is not only an aesthetics comment, but it's also on what is the level of engagement of these public policy officials with AI as a complex technological assemblage, and how much do they actually understand of the things they even suggest, because they're so vague and in any substance. And I mean, it appears that you have engaged a lot with these documents, and it seems that you have recovered from that. So I'm happy for this. But what is your take on what they actually offer in the public discourse? That's a general. Yeah.
My turn? Oh, okay. Well, I think, yes, I believe that there are too many. But also, I mean, there is obviously something to be said about the durability of the kinds of arguments that go across these policy documents, so that from biotechnology to circular economy to nanotechnology to all of these things, you do see these kinds of patterns in the concerns and how new technologies are both framed as revolutionary and just going to change the world, but also we can deal with them in all of these ways that we always deal with things, right? So there is that level of durability, right? But what we want to point out here, I think, is how even in these moments where we see these patterns of sort of even the invocation of growth, the invocation of competitiveness, all of these things across these documents, which we're arguing in the, we're dating this shift is sort of a thing, but we're saying this is a sort of a 21st century phenomenon in which we're not seeing this turn to the invisible hand and markets and all these stuff, and that in these documents you can see institutions, governing institutions, creating interesting spaces for not only society but governance, claiming power in certain ways in relation and within innovation, which is problematic, but also taking up these discourses that you can also see in the degrowth community. I mean, you see in the circular economy, there's all of, in the circular economy document that we quoted here in the 2021 plan, there is all of this talk of the right to repair and all of these community interventions into things, right? And so looking at how these documents mobilize society in the service of technological innovation to create larger spaces of governance for themselves that doesn't just depend on neoclassical economics and cannot be explained through that framework. Did you?
Yeah, I think just the mere fact that there are so many policy reports dealing with innovation today is already a kind of empirical signifier for that kind of shift, right? So I have been studying the OECD closely, and the OECD has probably brought forth some of the most sophisticated frameworks about innovation and the innovation imperative as such. It has always thought about innovation, but always only for economic policy and in the context of economic policy. And I've been working with the OECD to study them, but also to study them, I had to get in there somehow as a consultant, because suddenly the OECD wants to think about responsible innovation. They don't know how, because they don't know how to talk about innovation other than in the vocabulary of economics, but they feel like they have to, right? Because in all countries, responsible innovation, ethical AI, and so on is coming on the agenda. So it is this shift that is producing all these mass documents. These are not only documents that are related to or concerned with the relationship between innovation and economic growth, but the broader governance considerations that come with ever greater acknowledgement that innovation in itself is not just neutral, right? That it is political, and that we need to somehow decide upon that. Now, the imaginaries that are mobilized for that, that are constructed for that, this is where we want to point critique towards, because what does it mean when the EU now assumes the authority to govern innovation? Means that, okay, the power of governance actually is at EU level. If we see, as we see now with the AI Act, and actually streamlining quite an EU level top-down approach to governance in this domain, right? So this is where critique is equally necessary as it is necessary towards the growth narratives, is who governs where and with what kinds of ideas of society, democracy, etc. in place, right? So that is a little bit our point. And I think the sheer mass of documents just points to this kind of shift. Yeah.
Okay, Linda, can you go ahead with your question?
Oh, thank you very much for letting me speak, and thank you very much for this very, very interesting presentation, and also the collection of documents and describing a kind of also a global narrative, being around AI, technological innovation, and how it is framed in a kind of normative manner with regard to ecological sustainability on the one hand, but also with regard to, as you name it, the common good, public good, and also democratic practices. I like that very much, the shift you made at the end, that you said we have to connect it very much to the common good, but also to democracy and democratic practices in order to transform and also shape innovation practices. We at our institute do it also sometimes if we think about concepts like workplace democracy or participatory technology development, also to bring democratic elements into the process of innovation and how to shape them in such a way. My question would be, so you have a global trend of the common good, of the circular economy, about the twin transformation. Is the post-growth debate then at danger or a risk because the thoughts which were kind of brought in also by the idea of post-growth are now taken up by so many actors? Or is it rather a good addition and additional driver also for the post-growth movement in order to go further with this idea, say, support and like to bring forward?
Thank you so much for this question. So here is the same question that we ask ourselves. Where's the other slide? The slide before? For no, the on our paper. So Tess and me had a similar question for STS, which, as the story goes, also got co-opted, if you want to use that language, through the responsible innovation framework in all kinds of policy spaces, right? So it was an idea of somehow democratic innovation and greater participation and the inclusion of all kinds of questions about society and innovation governance. And then the EU somehow scaled it up through Horizon 2020, and then it became this big thing. And then people in the field felt uncomfortable, some very comfortable, some very uncomfortable with it, and asked like, okay, what is happening to STS ideas once they are suddenly in these places of power and gaining increasing power to speak to policymaking, etc., and to inform it. And we wrote a paper to that respect that we called The New Spirit of Technoscience, a little bit going in analogy to The New Spirit of Capitalism, the book by Boltanski and Chapello, where we said, well, if that is the case, so if for capitalism, the argument of this book goes that critique always ends up being eaten up by capitalism, right? Like capitalism is this weird monster that can always somehow like incorporate critique in such ways to make it productive for itself. Then we have a similar phenomenon with technoscientific governance or with technoscience in and of itself, where critiques of technoscience are always end up being eaten up by policymakers and by corporations and so on, so that in the end it is actually productive for getting even more innovation imperatives out there. Damn it, so what do we do with it? As STS scholars, we said like, well, then take the symmetrical lens and see how they are actually then, in our case, talking about responsibility, democracy, and innovation, and make very clear what your idea of democracy, innovation, and so on is, to differentiate it and to critique it. But to do so, you need to really look at this, because what STS usually is not good at, as I think the degrowth community, I don't know you well enough, so I don't want to say this, but I'm just trying to make a picture here, draw a picture here. Degrowth always criticizes growth. STS always criticizes techno-determinist rationales, okay? So this is what we're good at, this is what we were founded on, and we are like, okay, there are politics everywhere, and there is a future beyond growth, which would be the alternatives. But by only looking in this kind of way, or only orienting critique along these lines, we miss all these important other ways through which technology is justified, legitimized, innovation imperatives are constructed, and so on, where policymakers have moved far beyond just techno-determinist rationales, as we have tried to show in this presentation. They don't say AI will save the world. They say we have to get AI governance right, then it can save the world. And if we don't get it right, if we don't intervene as society, as governance, and as democratic systems, then it could actually kill us all. So the acknowledgement is there. And now the question is, what do they mean by we? What do they mean by democratic participation? What do they imagine as a good future of AI, etc., which we can then engage with as STS scholars to criticize and to actually recalibrate our critique from not just saying, always the same old strawman, you are all techno-determinists. No, they are not anymore. Things have changed. And maybe, I don't know, a similar thing applies to the degrowth place in or the degrowth role in current discourses about the environment and so on, where just accusing people of just only following the growth narrative just doesn't work anymore. It's not a critique anymore because they're not doing it anymore. So what would the critique then be? It's a question more than, yeah.
Actually, in the last 10 years in Europe are implementing zero growth rates.
I mean, I guess they're saying, policy saying green growth, and has been for a long time, isn't it? It's like trying to qualify things in order to, well, this is the question, is because I agree with you, and I really like the way you're presenting this, and it's almost like, actually, the OECD knows that technology and innovation is highly political, and what it's doing is very political, and it has a political strategy, and it's saying, trust us to kind of do the innovation in the right way. What it closes down or closes off with AI is the the possibility of resisting AI, full stop. This is a really dumb way to do computation. I was at an event a couple of weeks ago with the local group in Brighton of the Green Software Foundation, and there were programmers there who were just, like really worried about the energy. Somebody's saying, okay, we can fix fusion through AI. We'll make fusion work. And then there's an interesting thing. Would you want to live in a fusion world where energy is so concentrated? Who like all the questions of who benefits? And then there were other coders there who were like really, really worried about it. But the possibility of saying we shouldn't be doing this large language model processing, we shouldn't be doing this data intense stuff, all these techniques are just absurd. That you can't say that really, unless you don't look like anti-technological. So I wonder if, sorry, I'm rambling. The politics, their political strategy. Harry asked us what kind of politics, and I think with OECD they are playing a political game, which is to try and constrain and keep the politics within the realm of ethics and applications, rather than the possibility of just closing down the technology and not doing it, and thinking much more widely about how do we do computation in a radically different low energy way, where there are people in the world who are doing that. And Alex and I were at a workshop a few years ago talking about post-automation and the places where you use these subvert these technologies for non-automating kind of ways. So I think, but that gets made invisible and closed off by precisely the political strategies you're both pointing to. So I think it's really strong what you're saying in that respect for me.
Yeah, and on the other hand, thank you. On the other hand, sorry, if you want to, in another paper, we argued particularly about the OECD, but also about the European Commission, and this relates to what I said earlier. The OECD, okay, at least we could always point to the OECD as being that place of neoliberal hegemony of growth discourses and paradigms that was the bad actor somehow, right? So, okay, this is the place where this powerful knowledge is being created. And it is because of the OECD that we have so much streamlining of this kind of knowledge going on throughout the world. All right. Now the OECD is assuming the role of the defender of democracy when it starts to talk about things such as responsible innovation, democratic innovation, etc. So it's not only that the OECD then, of course, uses all of this shifting paradigm to re-justify imperatives of innovation, but is also suddenly the one who defines what good governance is, what responsible innovation is, what democracy is, for a set of countries that is supposed to be the rich club of rich countries in the world, right? And beyond. So with these shifting imperatives, with this new trend, or with this, let's say, new paradigm of actually justifying innovation imperatives through saying, okay, we need to bring society in, we need to bring the state in, we need to bring all these participatory, ethical, and so on frameworks in to govern this right, comes also the chance for organizations such as the OECD, the EU, and all kinds of other also local governments to claim authority over descriptions not only of what innovation is and what it is good for, but also what democracy is and what it is good for, and how society should get involved. And this is, of course, this is not the unruly publics that they want, right? In winners' terms. It's not that we want the peasants to get on their tractors everywhere, but we want to formalize ways of participation so that we can actually make this all smooth and great. And I think this is a two-way move. So it's not only that we stabilize innovation, but we also stabilize a particular vision of democracy that I think we all need to become much more attentive for. Not just say you are doing it wrong, but what is actually your vision of democracy here? What is your vision of governance here? And why are you the ones proclaiming what good governance and good democracy is, right?
Yeah, I have a question. I agree with your argument, but at the same time, I am from STS, but at the same time, I also engage with non-STS literature. So from non-STS literature or sister STS literature, people have been also talking about public engagement or democratization of science. So at one level, they have been talking about the techno-science and how they imagine public. But at the other level, they also have been talking about how public imagine science or how public engagement can be made possible in democratic societies and in non-democratic societies. And in non-democratic societies, and especially from political science literature, there has been huge criticism of like democracy as a theory. Like Marxist critique is there, like non-Marxist critique, non-Western critique as there are there. So from like a broader audience perspective, from science perspective, I agree. From STS perspective, that I agree that like rather than only looking science and techno-science, you also need to look society in a more critical way. Same literature has been happening in US, like public understanding of science. Initially, they deconstructed science, and then after 20 years, they started deconstructing public. So similar argument is going on in this, but like from like this spatial issue perspective or from the degrowth perspective, like I would be happy to say like how degrowth can be deconstructed. From like if it is projected as a social fix. But at the same time, like the commitment is to also think about like marginalized voices, marginalized or vulnerabilities or disenfranchisement, like how Adrian is also mentioning like good governance. Many times we co-opt this kind of language, or like many organizations co-opt. And the moment you co-opt, like you propose basically a societal fix, like so anything within that is fine, beyond that is problematic. And that is happening in many places. Like good governance is the tool. Everywhere people are talking about good governance. But at the same time, like in environmental studies literature, people have been also talking about the problems of good governance, or can good governance or international governance possible. So from the STS point of view, I appreciate your argument, but at the same time, how will you engage with some of these other literature, like which are anyway like critical of this kind of position? So where will the debate go from here to the next level?
Shall I continue? Thank you. I think you're absolutely right. And basically, I mean, this is more of an invitation to think with and add these literatures to our paper. I think this is a super nice point. I think there are two ways to see this. So you can, within taking democracy as not this fixed thing, this is democracy and this is socialism and this is this and this is that, but to take it also as a constructed concept that shifts over time, that is historically embedded and actually quite contingent depending on where you look at how people understand what democracy is. I wouldn't even say like the shift here is to say like, okay, but what are you actually understanding as democracy? Not saying democracy is good or bad, right? But asking like, okay. And then for the degrowth community, which is a question that I am starting to learn about your agenda, and I'm starting to understand what you guys are about, is the question like, okay, but where do you stand then towards or vis-a-vis different constructions of democracy? Is democracy a fixed thing for you, where you say this is good democracy and this is actually hollowed out capitalist neoliberal democracy, just states whatever serving the market, and then we have our own idea of democracy or socialist planning or whatever? I don't know. Question. In STS, we have until now, I think, never formed that agenda, because we are so keen on actually not doing that, but looking with this kind of bird's eye view on what the actors are defining as democracy. Responsive innovation took that step, and it actually went with quite a unclear idea of what it means with participation and democratization and so on into the policy room, and it actually also didn't fly. It flied up to a certain point, and then, of course, the Commission put its own idea of what democracy or participation is in there, because there was a void. So do we enter these analyses with our own ideas of what democracy or what other political system we find convincing or desirable? Or do we take it completely as an open signifier and go and see how the actors treat it? Or both? They treat it this way, but we want to treat it the other way. I don't know. I have no idea of what good democracy is. For me, democracy is not a thing that exists, right? Yeah, so that one. So I would be glad to learn from degrowth scholars what they think this notion, let alone of democracy or good governance or governance, actually means beyond what the actors themselves make it to.
Yeah, Yeah, I was building on that point. I think it's very important because I felt like you stand on a kind of paradoxical position, I think, where you say, okay, degrowth advocates should not just do critique, and they should have, without understanding what these actors mean by terms like democracy, participation, etc., right? And then you're asking a kind of like, so what do you degrowth guys? What is your own perspective on democracy, participation? What do you bring to the table? And I feel like if you are treating yourself as a kind of external observant here, where you have like, you deal with the policymakers on the one hand, and then degrowth on the other. So my question, what I would like to see is, what is your view of that is what will be very interesting to see in the paper. What is your view of democracy? What is your view of participation in order to make this connection between post-growth and degrowth? Because the paradox here is by widening the critique to include these non-economic aspects, what you're doing is just carrying on for a bit longer with the critique, rather than really taking a stand and saying, okay, this is what we actually want, or this is what we actually need here from a post-growth perspective. Oh, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I'm very much. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I'm very much on the constructionist side, but I think for the paper, I think that will be the actual contribution, because otherwise we are here in very familiar territory where we have done this with eco-modernism, we have done the same with green growth, we have done the same. So I think what is needed is, I think where the paper should make the contribution is precisely in your last slide. You know, I think that's where the paper should really develop some kind of argument. Otherwise, I think we're going in circles now, like, you know, bringing in maybe a critique of, you know, like, okay, now these technologies are not being legitimized only for the sake of growth. Now it's including other like notions, terminology, etc. But again, like, you know, from a post-growth perspective, what does it actually mean for us? And where do we actually stand here?
Probably both have responses.
Yes.
I think that I would reinterpret your question, because starting from what we think democracy should be, or we think political order would be, an entirely different question, and not one that we're going to answer in this paper. But I take your question instead as a provocation and an opening to indeed make some connections we haven't made yet here, and make some stronger arguments about exactly sort of what the implications are for the forms of critique, and what we're asking people to sort of open up and look at instead, what that offers to this scholarship, and to a critical stance, and to a critical stance that comes with a normative position. So we're not saying our normative position is the right one, but to offer a framing in which we can offer our critique as concretely sort of informing such a activity.
Yeah, again, I think the politics of the normativity, and this seems to me to be one of the key differences after spending a day with you guys. For us, lies in exactly these kinds of shifting the perspective and saying, like, okay, let's not just start from a growth critique and degrowth agenda, but let's look at how people are talking about this. Then let's say, okay, they're obviously not only talking about innovation for growth, they are talking about innovation for environment good, social good, they are talking about limiting this, they are talking about new consumption and production patterns. They're talking in all kinds of degrowth or not degrowth vocabulary, but not the old vocabulary. Changes happen. Yeah. Whether we find they are good or not, okay, let's leave the picture out. But by just shifting the perspective, we are already doing quite a political move in getting out of a path-dependent trajectory of critique to say like, okay, let's shift the perspective, let's look at it, let's see things as they are, and then we can actually make up new forms of critique that are actually responding to the realities of the worlds that we are studying, looking at, and trying to change, right? So my normativity would be in this getting out and what you say, like being the external actor, not being the involved one that also has an agenda and that also wants to change the world, but to say like, okay, how do you people all want to change the world? And then to ask, okay, and where is my position in there and how can I respond to that better, right? Before just assuming that they all want to change the world in these ways and I am against it and I have my own agenda. Does that make things clear? So I would be totally against in this paper ending it with, and actually the European Commission is getting it wrong. It has the wrong idea of democracy, but saying, look, if we look closely, we see it's not local communities who are defining here what good environmental futures are. It's the European Commission. Do we want a critique of the European Commission or the European Union as the place of power and governance over new technologies and environmental futures? Question mark. If I look at the degrowth literature, it goes the other way around. We want to empower local communities and not put it up there somewhere in Brussels, right? So it could be a critique of the European Commission and the European Union in assuming power over different policy domains, for example. It could be a critique of how they actually talk about regulation and what regulation can or cannot do. It could be a critique of what they imagine a good future is and a future that always involves innovation. As Adrian so nicely said, well, why do we need AI in the first place to make good futures, etc.? But we first need to look at this closely to say like, okay, what is happening here before we can make that kind of critique.
Sorry, but my point is that I think this is already being done. I don't agree that these legal people don't look at policy empirically, or just always look at policy from a very normative perspective. So my point is that to add something else, and I'm not saying you have to come with a normative perspective. I think the argument you are making now is valid and legitimate, but this should come more. This should be foregrounded more clearly, because if the argument of the paper is that degrowth people are always taking a normative side and criticizing growth, I think that is my understanding is that this is a little bit of straw manning like degrowth. But I think the really strong argument like you can make is precisely what you are saying now. So the next step. So what do we do next? And I think that is what I would like to see more in the paper, rather than this kind of say like, which to me like there was a little bit of mischaracterization of the way like degrowth deals with policy and policy in policy innovation and technology, right?
Not with policy, with innovation. And there I have to admit that I am not well read enough in degrowth literature to have all the nuanced positions that are within this community. Surely there's this Jason Hickel man whom I just encountered yesterday for the first time, and his arguments about technology, which is surely only one side of the debate. But I think this is why we are here, to also then get feedback from you guys on how this might be differentiated. We don't want to point to degrowth as being the strong and the bad actor in this doing it wrong, but say like, okay, you have a critique, this critique is valid, but let's see how we can make it even better with STS analysis, right? Which is what I understood Mario was also framing this workshop as being an opportunity for doing this. Not that you need us, but if you invite us to.
I'm not articulating my point clearly. I'm not saying, what I'm saying is that I think this is precisely the contribution that should be more clearly foregrounded. Because I think you take everything else that come before that is, for me at least, this is kind of familiar territory taken in a new context, which is like, maybe But I think where you can make like a real contribution is by actually bringing the politics, and your politics is precisely like what you are articulating now, which is not clearly articulated in the argument. I'm not sure whether that is clear. Like it wasn't me. What I meant is that if the whole point of the paper is to say degrowth people haven't done this, I think this will be a bit misguided. But I think what is really valuable in what you're saying is precisely this political argument. I don't know, like as someone that comes from a degrowth background, I think this is where I think you should go deeper.
Can I make very quick?
More time.
Yeah, okay, so maybe we can have more conversation later over dinner.
Thank you so much. I think just to be very, very precise, what we are missing in terms of why we are not able to see what you're trying to show us is that it looks like a conversation between the policy documents and you. When you're saying that democracy, these ideals look very abstract in the sense that you have an assumed notion of what democracy should look like, while you articulate how these policy documents are seeing democracy, the dominant narratives, but we don't know what other narratives are there. And it all falls on you, and we see you and them. So it might be useful to bring other actors in the scene and add some more documents, maybe from civil society, of how they are imagining things and how they are engaging with the shifting dynamics. Because I'm sure they are also engaging, because we are the scholars. Our publications comes 2 years after. Civil society has to immediately respond. That's happening in India, for example. I'm writing on digital agriculture like for 4 years now. They are, after every government's document, they are responding to it. So maybe bring some of these actors and maybe it will help.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great bridge then between what we are saying. So the next step would be to say, okay, if degrowth scholarship is so well trained and so interested in studying local expressions of things, right? More localized, then let's ask them. I mean, this is not our expertise, right? We study up, not in STS as such, but Tess and me, we are interested in these policy organizations. You're interested in studying do-it-yourself communities that make things on the ground. Perfect, they can be brought perfectly together, right? But of course, everyone has his or her project, and our project is just to look at these places of power, and your project is to look at the places that are somehow disempowered but could be empowered better, right? So maybe there is another match how STS, our degrowth can be brought.
So we are heading towards the conclusion, and a quick point. Maybe I have time if we have time. I think there is a very strong point in your presentation, especially when it comes to the end, when you say correctly, I guess, that we need to look at the present discourse without making up or creating instruments about what the OECD is about when they talk about innovation. And it's evident that now there is a change in the discourse. You have people in Europe, in the UK, but also in the US, talking about a different way of reorienting innovation for the social good. This is not even like especially new. And for my PhD, I focus on this idea of using innovation as a new way of rebranding the project of development. No, and there was a very famous and influential report by the OECD talking about inclusive innovation and inclusive growth, right? So my question is to what extent your invitation to look at the way the OECD is talking about democracy is different from other example of rebranding innovation or rebranding other concepts using the notion of inclusivity, like in the case of inclusive innovation. When I look at inclusive innovation in the context of the Sardinian continent, what I discovered was that on the practice was inclusion to the markets. So they wanted people to include the poor into the markets. And then what I've done was exactly what Poonam was suggesting, doing like a mapping, a constellation of different vision on the same topic, no? And then I discovered that in India, the constellation was very rich, and there were people science movements that were approaching the topic of innovation and science from a very radical perspective, talking about democracy. So to what extent this new language is just a rebranding of all the ideas in an instrumental way to keep the status quo functioning, no? Because this is what I think Adrian was saying about the fact that, okay, they are talking about democracy, but actually they are setting the boundaries of what is possible within democracy, no? And this is a very STS way of reasoning, no? I'm wearing the STS hat here, no?
Yes.
And then we finish because I think that we are exhausted, no?
But yeah, I mean, just to, because we had the similar discussion yesterday, Tessanie, sorry that I'm
No,
taking
please.
this up again. Is this old wine in new bottles, or are these new bottles and new wine in old bottles, or what is the relationship here exactly? And maybe the point is that even if it is old wine in new bottles, the bottle still matters. The new bottle still matters, right? So the change still matters. It matters from which bottle we drink the wine, right? in wine, maybe not so much as our glass, but from which cork we have up there.
It
whatever,
matters
right?
how legitimate
Is being constructed.
being
Yes.
constructed.
Yes. And in that sense, I think even if we think that everything remains the same and nothing ever happens, change still happens, we have to understand it to then make better critique of it, right? To the stability of things. If we just hit the strawman always with the same kind of critique, and the strawman is like, well, I can adapt to this, but you end up not hitting it in the right spot, right? So a little bit like this, I agree with your inclusive innovation agenda of the OECD point. I think this is exactly what happened. But what I would do then as a scholar would say, look, this is how the OECD defined it. This is how all these other people define it. And who is the OECD to claim authority about what inclusivity is, for example? Why aren't we opening up processes to actually a definition between multiple stakeholders in this project of inclusivity? Which is actually what STS has always said then, right? Why are you the only ones assuming authority over claims to democracy, innovation, technology, and so on?